هذه للتعاون بشكل أفضل والمناصرة من أجل التغيير. معنا ينضم إلي في هذا النقاش صوفيا جافيس. صوفيا وهي منسق المشروع العمل العاملين في شتات دنمارك، مبادرة دنمارك الموجودة ضمن مجلس الدنماركي للاجئين، ولديها ماجستير في دراسات السلام والنزاع من جامعة أبسلا، وأيضا شهادة الجامعة من في التركيز على النزاع والهويات من جامعة ماستريخت. وقد بدأت مهنتها في العمل على تبطين اللاجئين وتطويرهم وفي السويد وبناء قدراتهم وأمريكا، وعملت في IOM في لبنان لدعم المجتمعات التي تأثرت بالنزاع والنزوح. وقبل الانضمام إلى دنمارك كانت عملت ل3 سنوات كمنسقة لDRC مشروعهم، حيث كانت لدعم المغتربين، حيث كانت في مشاريع التي تعمل في الصومال وأفغانستان. انضمت إلينا أيضا كلارا شيبو من شبكة. كلارا تعمل كمستشارة مديرة برامج للشبكة موجودة في بريطانيا، وهي منظمة للاستشارات والدراسات تركز على المهاجرين والعمل الإنساني والاستجابة. والشبكة تعمل على البحث النوعي وأيضا الكمي من خلال الخبرات، وأيضا تعمل مع المنظمات المحلية وأيضا في الشتات. كلارا عملت السنوات الماضية مع عدد منظمات في أوروبا، وعملوا على التطوير التي تعمل في بلدان الأصل. وكلارا أيضا نسقت في عمل في فرنسا وعملت في بناء القدرات في المنصة الأوروبية أدابت في بلجيكا، وتنسق أيضا مشاريع متعددة مع أصحاب مصلحة في دول الأصول، في دول النامية، وأيضا في مواضيع التنمية وأيضا الدعم الإنساني. كثير من هذه الحوارات ستتحدث عن بلدان أو دول الأصول قد تشيرون إليها على أن باسمها، وأيضا يمكن لكم أن تأتوا بفكرة أو قد تكون مفيدة لكي تشرح هذه النظريات والأفكار على أساس أننا لسنا خبراء، نحن فقط نشارك معرفتنا وآرائنا وما رأينا. قد يكون طبعا أنتم لديكم خبراء أفضل، قد تتفقون قد تختلفون معنا، لكن نرغب بسماع منكم بعد الحوار الذي كان بيننا في هذه الأمور. سأطلب الآن الإجابة على عدد من الأسئلة من المتحدثين، الإجابة، وسأجيب على بعض منها بنفسي. السؤال الأول لكلارا من شبكة. كلارا، ربما هل يمكن أن تحدثي أكثر على أساس خبرتك في شبكة، ما هي التبادلات بين المنظمات في الشتات والمنظمات المحلية؟ كيف أن هذه العلاقات في دول الأصل يمكن أن تكون متساوية؟ كيف يمكن أن ندخل في هذه النقاشات حول التحول نحو المحلية وتفكيك الاستعمار التي ذكرت سابقا خلال الجلسات الماضية؟ تفضلي كلارا. شكرا جزيلا، نعمتم صباحا من أي مكان كنتم فيه، وشكرا على هذه الحوارات المثيرة للاهتمام. أعتقد أنه تحدي لأكون على قدر الكلام، لأن في الجلسة الأخيرة وبعض النقاط أقدر أننا في الجلسة الأخيرة حيث كثير من المواضيع قيلت. لا أعتقد أنني سأبدأ بالإجابة على كل الأسئلة، لكن مما يمكن البدء به هو نعم، هناك كثير من التبادلات التي حدثت بين منظمات المغتربين والمحلية، وأخذت هذه أشكال متعددة. هنالك الدعم المالي، جمع الخبرات، الأموال، مشاركة المعلومات، وما يحدث في بلدان اللي فيها أزمات، وهذا هو السياق الدولي. هناك أيضا المناصرة، زيادة الوعي، الدعم النفسي حتى. أعتقد أن هذا الأمر لا يذكر، لكن أنا أعتقد أن معظم الناس يتحدثون من منظور ما رأيناه نحن في شبكة. الانخراط الخاص بالمنظمات في أثناء الأزمات، لكن خارج الأزمة لدينا أيضا العلاقات الموجودة، وأيضا تبادل والاستجابات العاطفية. كل هذه التبادلات تمكن هذه الشراكات الطويلة واستدامة العلاقات، وتساهم بين المؤسسات، تساهم في جعل منظمات المغتربين مستجيبة من المستجيبات الأوائل في أثناء الأزمات. إذن
أعتقد أنه من المهم أن نقول أيضا، لأني أشرت هذا الأمر، لدينا كثير من شبكات العمل لمنظمات الشتات، ولديهم آراء في سياقات مختلفة في بلدان التي قدموا منها، أو بلدان يبقون فيها في وقت مؤقت، أو بلدان يقومون بها. حين نتحدث عن علاقة بين المنظمات المحلية والشتات، أعرف أن بعض المتحدثين تحدثوا عن هذا الأمر، كيف يمكن
criticized or at least analyzed. And I think the term of reciprocity is very important. How can we make sure that you have shared power, you have shared risk and not risk transfer? And I think that if you share resources and leadership, and this is something that diaspora organizations already do.
إذن هذا شيء منظمات المغتربين يجب أن تكون متساوية، ويجب أيضا أن تكون أن تنظر إلى أن إلى الآخرين هم مساوون لك وشركاء. المنظمات المحلية، منظمات اللاجئين لا تعتبر المنظمات المحلية
as implementing agencies who would consider local organization as implementing agencies too.
دائما يتم النظر للمنظمات المحلية كمنظمات تقوم بالتطبيق، وأعتقد هناك حاجة للتغيير. هناك شيء، المسألة يتعلق بإشارة الموارد والمسؤوليات والسلطة على القرارات، وربطها بمسألة التوطين أو محلية العمل. هناك الكثير من المواضيع والأمور الكثيرة التي قلت اليوم. الشتات ينظر إليهم كما ليسوا محليين بل عاملين إنسانيين، وهذا أمر صحيح. حقيقة أن الناس في الشتات ليسوا محليين، لكن لديهم قنوات مع الناس المحليين. حين نعالج مسألة التوطين، نقوم باستخدام تشبيه الطاولة وبناء طاولة أخرى. لا نحاول استبدال فاعل بفاعل آخر ببناء طاولة أكبر، وهذا يجب أن يتم من خلال المحلية وبناء طاولة كبيرة يكون فيها جميع متساوون بها، يجلسون على كراسي متساوية للمحليين والدوليين وفي الشتات، لأن المحليين والناس في الشتات مكون آخر، ومن خلال التنسيق يتم ذلك. هذا أمر يساعد على شمول الجميع وإيجاد استجابة إنسانية ذات كفاءة. لا أعرف أن تحدثت كثيرا، لكن لازم، لأننا منظمة تقوم بالبحث، نحدد ونلاحظ ونحاول تسليط الضوء على بعض الميكانيزمات أو الآليات المتشابهة بين مجتمعات مختلفة. لكن أحب أن أسمع وجهات نظركم ووجهات نظر المتحدثين، إذا كانت لديكم أمثلة أخرى غير التي طرحها. سوف نعود لك حول النقاط التي أثرتها. السؤال التالي الذي نرغب مناقشته حول الفعاليين الإنسانيين المحليين والشتات، وهل يمكن أن يثقوا ببعضهم البعض؟ لماذا نعمل؟ ماذا لا؟ ما الذي يمكن القيام به لزيادة الثقة؟ وسوف أقفز على بعض هذه النقاط، وسوف أتحدث عن تجربتي الشخصية كشخص كان جزء من الشتات الصومالي. عشت في إيطاليا وفي المملكة المتحدة، وفي لحظة من لحظات حياتي قررت العودة، وأصبح منظمة تسمى كونسورسيوم صومالية تقوم بتنسيق بين المنظمات المحلية والدولية في البلاد، لكن كمستشار لرئيس الوزراء بين عام 2019 و 2020. النقطة الأولى التي يبدأ بها في النقاش وقد تحدثت عنها منذ شهرين، حين أصبحت مدير لمنظمة كونسورسيوم الصومالي، هناك أحدهم من منظمة دولية كتب إيميلا طويلا سألني كيف يمكن أن أكون مديرا وأنا صومالي. هذه سابقة كانت له. الصوماليين لا يمكن أن يكونوا محايدين سواء كانوا محليين أو من الشتات، ولا يمكن أن يقوم بالعمل بصورة كفؤة. هذا كانت وجهة نظري والانطباع المأخوذ. هناك زملاء صوماليون يمكن أن يشهدوا ما قمنا به بالعمل. هذا مثال أنك لا تحاكم حسب قدراتك بل حسب جنسيتك. هذا المثال ويقال أنك يمكن أن تكون محايدا لأنك من هذا البلد دون ذاك. شاركت هذا المثال لأني أسمع الكثير من الحديث عن التوطين والمحلية العمل. هناك كثير من المنظمات والأفراد يتحدثون الناس عن هذه المسائل ويقول لك لا تتحدث عن هذه المسائل لما لم تكن لديك قدرة على نقل المعرفة إلى الناس. أود أن أظهر لكم لا يوجد اختلاف بين المحليين، وخاصة حين يكون هناك انطباعات سلبية. دور الشتات في الصومال كان موضوعا لكثير، حيث تم اعتبار الصومال سنوات كثيرة كدولة فاشلة fail state، لكن ما يناقش الناس أن ما جعل البلد يبقى قائما على قدميه أنماط أخرى من قبل المجتمع المدني تم من خلالها التأقلم. زميلنا تحدث بكفاءة. الOCD المنظمة للتعاون والتنمية الاقتصادية تعرف الدولة الهشة، الدولة التي فيها النقص في الثقة بين الدولة
services, security and social services, and the society itself. And in the absence of a state, you have other actors that come in and fill in that gap. The international community is one, the international aid system. But again, I say, that the diaspora has been a pivotal part of keeping, this space alive of provision of services and providing a lifeline to the country. On whether diaspora and locals trust each other, it's not a question that I personally want to answer or I think I can answer. First of all, because I'm biased. I'm from the diaspora itself. But also what I can say is that by nature, there is a trust deficit in conflict-affected states, right? So everything revolves around that. What I know is that, trust is built between the interconnection, in the interconnection between people. The more people engage, the more they trust each other. And it's the same between a state and a society. The more people see that the states provide, hospital, the more they visit the hospital, the more they see the doctors that are paid by the states, and the more they feel, a sort of attachment to that state or country or government, whatever it is. But, the principal element through which diaspora has played a role in Somalia is remittances. It was a lifeline. And just, to share a few statistics, between 2018 and 2020, the World Bank said that, about 25% of the country's GDP was based on remittances received from abroad. In areas like Somaliland and Puntland, this reached 40%. And in some cases, went all the way to 65%. Particularly during, crisis periods. We're talking about the famine of 2011 and others. And these, remittances are sent by diaspora to poor family members to support their food, housing, education, and health needs. But we also have, on top of that, many politicians, I think it was referenced before, representatives of the business community that are also, members of the diaspora. This is also reflected in the aid community. You have people from the diaspora working local NGOs, international NGOs, UN agencies, and donors themselves. So it's really about this interconnected world, interconnected dimension where trust is affected. If you don't engage with people, if people don't engage with the state, then there's going to be more mistrust and there's going to be that trust deficit. But the biggest, one for me in terms of trust issues that I've seen and I've noticed in my experience in Somalia is that between the international community and the locals. And the locals are different actors. And I would say diaspora, I would include the governments. We don't talk enough about local governments as part of that system. And so you have actually, in a context like Somalia, my experience has been two parallel systems working with each other. One that is dominated by the international community and one that is dominated by locals. And the two systems do not trust each other. And so for me, it's important to look at the trust issue from that angle and that perspective. I'll perhaps stop here and maybe we can talk more during the Q&A session, and there's much more to be said about the element of trust. But I'll ask Sophia to jump in from DEMAC and to talk perhaps about the relationships and partnership dynamics between diaspora and local actors in countries of heritage, how these are perceived. What, in Sophia, in your opinion, are the desired principles for partnerships and collaboration? And if you can perhaps also give examples of successful partnerships and partnership principles that you've seen employed in your work with DEMAC. Over to you, Sophia.
Yes, thank you very much, Abdurrahman, and thanks to everybody who's here today. So maybe just to start briefly, I think as Abdurrahman said at the beginning, all of us are really speaking from our perspective, and to share briefly about DEMAC when it comes to diaspora local partner relationships. We as an initiative, we work to conduct both research and provide practical support to diaspora humanitarian responders with a focus on improving coordination among diaspora as well as between diaspora, local, and international actors. And we've very recently been working in Ukraine with the Syrian diaspora as well in responding to the earthquake, Somalia, and Sudan. So I will be speaking a little bit based on my observations from these contexts. And like I said, like Abdurrahman said, I'm also looking forward to hearing the critique, feedback, and additions from those of you that are more familiar with these contexts. When it comes maybe first of all to the relationships and dynamics between diaspora and local actors and a few observations there. First of all, something that has struck me recently is that there is not always such a clear line either between diaspora and local actors. As Clara was saying, diaspora are very diverse, local actors are very diverse. And I think we see a point where these kind of come very close together, looking at, for example, a context like Somalia, where we have, diaspora based in the UK or Sweden running volunteer-based organizations from Europe and providing support in Somalia. But we also have local organizations that feel and refer to themselves as local, but have maybe, 50% diaspora leadership in their board. So I think that also sets the stage a little bit for looking at it as a bit of a blurred line with more local and more diaspora, depending on who we're speaking with. And some observations on this, on how the relationships and the dynamics are perceived and seen by both diaspora and local actors. I think building on maybe a little bit Abdurrahman's observation about Somalia as well, in comparison to international actors at least, and I know that there can be big issues with trust at the community level and between diaspora and communities. I do think there are many cases that I've heard of where diaspora are seen as an extension of the communities where they're from. Someone can feel free to correct me and jump in here, but I have heard people refer to diaspora as our community members abroad, for example. And I think that also sets the stage a little bit for the partnership and a relationship in a certain case. It shows the legitimacy that diaspora can have and a shared direction in terms of joint goals as well as shared stakes. And I think this touches as well a bit on solidarity, which you were discussing in the last session. And it's something that has come up a lot in our discussions with the Ukrainian diaspora and localization. And specifically what comes to mind is we had a local Ukrainian organization saying in a panel that, you know, it's also a feeling to be in the middle of a conflict or a humanitarian crisis and feel that you have diaspora all around the world who are also working night and day, who are advocating with their politicians, who are not sleeping because of what is happening to you where you are. And that's a very different feeling than reaching out to, you know, an INGO or someone in Denmark, if you're pointing fingers at me, who closed their laptop at 5 o'clock and won't get back to your email for 2 weeks. I think that's also something to not be underestimated. Then in these relationships, there is the very close, consistent, and agile communication with communities that are affected by humanitarian crises. We'll have a research coming out from Sudan very soon that just shows the diaspora are connected to communities at all times. This means that they have a very strong understanding of local dynamics and needs, information sharing, and early warnings, and also an ability to follow up on and participate in accountability exercises when it comes to aid that they provide. Then there is maybe a backside to that as well. I know that I've heard, if we're looking more at some of the challenges with communication between local and diaspora, that in some cases local actors feel that diaspora are disconnected. You know, if you get to many generations away, or as was touched on in the previous panel, if there are different perspectives on kind of both political and humanitarian needs. I think if we take the case of Afghanistan, we see, you know, that that diaspora are sometimes responding in a little bit of a different way than local actors feel is needed. And this can also create tensions and challenges between diaspora and local actors. And then, of course, as was also mentioned in the previous panel, I don't think this issue of that diaspora can potentially contribute to entrenching these older patterns of marginalization, exclusion, and vulnerability. That's not something that can be ignored. And I think many diaspora are aware of that. But it's something we need to continue to talk about with local actors and between diaspora. Building off of these, just to give a few examples of good principles for partnership and support to localization. I think we've seen cases where diaspora have been extremely complementary and seen themselves in a supporting role to local actors. One example is following the earthquake that affected northwest Syria. Many of the diaspora members that were outside of Turkey and Syria were unaffected, and they saw that some of the NGOs and the more kind of established Syrian organizations were not able to respond because they had been so affected. And they therefore took on a role, and they have said this as well, that they took on a role of doing what the local responders could not. And then as soon as they were again able to get on their feet, then they took a role of, okay, what can we do to support you in the response that you're leading? So this is an example of really taking the perspective of where can diaspora be complementary and supportive of what local actors need. Longer term partnerships and funding, I think I won't go into this one because I heard it was touched on before, but diaspora that partner with the same local organizations, I think that's a case in Somalia when they have strong connections to the same partners and can have a long collaboration as well as fill gaps that these local partners face in their funding. And maybe lastly, just to mention that diaspora are working across this humanitarian development and peace nexus. And I think this combined with the longer term partnerships with local actors, it really contributes to localization in the sense that local actors can be supported with what they and their communities need in the moment. Because when international actors take these very fixed perspectives on what phase of the response are we in now, what types of activities can we fund, what is eligible on a budget, they're not always able to provide what is needed. And diaspora will work on education in emergencies. In the case of Sudan right now, diaspora have been leading a lot of initiatives. We have one example of Jobs for Sudan, if anyone has heard of that before, where the Sudanese diaspora are matching recent migrants and refugees with jobs so that they can work while displaced. So I think those are some examples of best practices. Again, when it comes to potential pitfalls, we have the top-down diaspora leadership that was mentioned before, as well as not necessarily realizing the positionality on more sensitive topics. So I think those are the things that I've observed that can be pitfalls there. So to sum it up, I would say building on principles of complementarity, seeing diaspora as supporters to local actors, and solidarity and consistent engagement have been the biggest successes that I've seen from a DEMOC perspective. Back to you, Abdurrahman.
Thank you, Sophia. I see there's some questions and comments on the post. We're going to try to answer some of them, but also if there are any questions in Arabic, Fatima, I might have to ask for your help. But we'll just go through some quick questions to all the panelists, and then maybe open up for any comments that others may have on this topic and subject. But I'd like to bring in back Clara in the discussion, and maybe Clara, ask you about this issue of generational differences in the way diaspora humanitarian actors engage on different issues. Is there a difference in the role of second, third generations? And is there a better way to engage different generations in these conversations? Over to you, Clara.
Thank you. Yeah. If we go back to the initial, like the title of the session, like strengthening the pillars. Yes, one pillar being like relations in countries of residence or settlements, how you want to call them. And one point is the generational divide, because we all know that when crises or conflicts last for a long time, you unfortunately have time for different generations to be involved or willing to get involved. And sometimes there's either, we can see it from two perspectives, either some difficulties from older generations or first generation of diaspora to engage and reach out to younger generations, because maybe as or mostly, or maybe as it's already been mentioned, sometimes the link, the sense of belonging, the bonds with the country of origin or heritage sometimes changes with time, and you feel maybe less concerned, or it's more difficult to relate to a situation that you less know. And also for some younger generations, they sometimes feel that they want to to engage, but they don't know how. They don't know who to reach out to, and they maybe don't know enough of the culture. They may have the syndrome of the imposter syndrome, or they may need to have a lot of strengths and willing to just say, okay, I'm here, maybe I don't know a lot, but I'm still here and I want to help. What we've noticed is that unfortunately during events, crises, it kind of creates an opportunity for younger generation to engage, because you need to engage and act very quickly. And second generation, even if they may have, I would say, a less important knowledge of local context and maybe less active relationships with local partners beyond their maybe family links, they maybe are very at ease with using digital tools. They can form transnational networks. They can use online spaces. They are very good at launching fundraising campaigns. And maybe since they are sometimes more grounded in the countries where they live in, they may have more access to political spaces of or spaces of power. So this is something that we've studied and we're still really interested in at Shabaka. How can we reduce this generational divide and foster younger generation engagement? And I think one speaker mentioned it, using technology and digital tools is something that is very critical. So sometimes a lot of organizations, diaspora organizations, wherever they are, I know some one speaker said, oh, or an attendee said, oh, should we only consider diaspora organization based in the global north? No, diaspora is like they are all over the place, and wherever they are, it's about, sometimes you don't have a lot of visibility. And as a diaspora organization, being visible for younger generations to just reach out to you, talk to you, and engage is the very first step. And if I can just add one thing, we talk about generation, but you also have inter-diaspora space. Like the one we're having now is very important, and it shouldn't remain a one-shot like meeting, and creating and providing spaces for all actors to exchange and engage in very relevant topics is something that should also be explored to reinforce these pillars.
Thank you. Thank you. We are running out of time, so Sophia, I will ask you to very shortly maybe answer the next question about, since you're based in Denmark, if I'm not wrong, Sophia, what do you see also the relationships across, wider public in countries of residence citizenships? What opportunities, possibilities do diaspora actors have to advocate for desired change, either at policy, institutional level, but also in terms of influencing, change amongst the broader public? And if I can give you, please, 2 minutes to answer this very difficult question. Thank you.
Yes. I mean, first of all, I do think that this is a huge area for improvement, both among those of us that are practitioners in the diaspora world, the general public, and diaspora themselves. Maybe first to say, I think there's a huge opportunity for diaspora to engage across different countries of origin. This is something we try to provide different platforms for at DEMAC, and every time we do, we receive the feedback that we need more of this. I think it's a natural space where diaspora don't necessarily always link to others from different countries of origin, but there are a lot of lessons to be learned. In terms of advocating for change at policy and institutional levels, I think this is a major strength of diaspora. They have this understanding of their countries of origin as well as the countries of residence, which often comes with an ability to explain things to policymakers in the country of residence, and to, stand in front of the parliament when they have to write letters to the newspaper, to mobilize their neighbors and friends in a kind of unique way that other people don't necessarily have. And they can and often do this while really lifting up local voices. I think one example is from a few years ago, but the Nigerian diaspora were very active, for example, in I think it was called the Bring Back Our Girls campaign for the girls that were kidnapped by Boko Haram. And we see this also in more recent contexts as well, with the Sudanese diaspora advocating for support from policymakers across many countries. So I think, this is something that diaspora are doing very well, and it's something that should also be leveraged more, maybe as an action point, more for policymakers to kind of listen and go to diaspora. That's a recommendation that we could bring out as well and create platforms where that's happening.
Thank you, Sophia. Maybe I want to add a few points just based on my experience where in certain countries, obviously, the diaspora are also constituencies and voters, and by virtue of that can influence, politicians and members of parliament. I mean, I remember engaging with a number of embassies when I was in Somalia, and they would state the reason why they were working or doing projects in Somalia was because they have an important Somali diaspora in the country, in their own countries. But also, a few examples, I could share, but we don't have time about, how, for example, the diaspora was active in the wake of the 2011 famine to raise voices and messages about what was happening in country. It's the same with the Sudanese diaspora, and as you said, Clara, I think Sophia mentioned it, and also Clara, the diaspora is an important source of information when you don't know what's happening on the ground and you're not clear with the picture on the ground. But also, there is a lot of solidarity that I've seen among Somalis on, for example, advocating around issues related to remittances when in the UK banks wanted to close remittance companies, and when it comes to advocating around amongst common issues. But also that some of these diaspora representatives also become, policymakers in the countries of residence. When it concerns, for example, Somalis, we have members of parliaments in Finland, Sweden, the USA, Canada. We have representation in local governments, councillors who are also equally influential in addressing some of these issues. One big name in Canada is Ahmed Hussein from the Liberal Party, who has been a senior cabinet minister 4 times, actually, and how he's also the Minister for International the development. So I think strong anecdotes and good stories to share from that area of influencing, but also there are still more and more that could be done eventually. I'm going to open up now. We have, I think, about 8-9 minutes. The floor for other participants to come in and contribute. I think maybe what I'll do is I'll ask anyone who wants to share experiences to raise their hands with the raise hand function. And I'm going to ask also Fatima to help me where possible, and Tina with facilitating, people's interventions. So you might, want to share your point of view. You might want to say that you agree or disagree with what any of the speakers have said, or you might eventually also want to ask a question. So the floor is open. I think I see, is it Hannah? Yes, Hannah.
Yeah.
Hannah, please go ahead.
Jana, yeah. Jana,
yes.
Yes, you can open.
Jana, yes, Jana, sorry.
I'm really not sure how we'll do with the translation channel, but Jana.
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام.
السلام عليكم. لا أستطيع الحديث باللغة الإنجليزية بشكل طليق، لذلك أرجو منكم أن تستمعوا لسؤالي باللغة العربية ثم تترجمونه كيفما تشاءون. أنا أتحدث عن تمام، بارك الله فيك. أنا أتحدث عن الجمعية الخيرية الإسلامية بالخليل. نحن جمعية عاملة في الضفة الغربية تقوم على رعاية 6000 يتيم بفضل الله سبحانه وتعالى. يعني يوجد دعم خارجي عندنا من المغتربين الفلسطينيين، لكن من أهم التحديات التي واجهناها تحديدا مع المغتربين ولنقل في بريطانيا اللي هي وجود إشكاليات في التحويلات لنا كجمعية، إضافة إلى أن التصنيفات التي يتم وضع الجمعيات فيها القديمة تؤثر كثيرا على وضعنا كجمعية. يعني في وضع معين تم تصويب معظم الجمعيات الفلسطينية، ومع ذلك ما زلنا كجمعيات فلسطينية نواجه مشاكل في الحصول على التبرعات. أنا أتحدث عن جمعية تقوم على رعاية 6000 يتيم وتقدم لهم الرعاية التعليمية والصحية والتدريب المهني والتمكين الاقتصادي. هذا إضافة إلى أننا نواجه أنه ما هي مدى انعكاس الانقسامات التي تحدث في بلدنا والانقسامات التي تحدث في البلدان العربية على التوجهات الموجودة لدى المغتربين. ظهرت عندنا الحمد لله يعني مشاركات من بريطانيا، وهي من خلال السياح، وفود السياح تأتي لزيارة الجمعية، تعجب بها، تحاول أن تكفل الأيتام من خلالها، تواجه مشاكل في التحويلات. إذا المشكلة أصبحت بيننا وبين المغتربين هي السياسات المالية، كيف يمكن أن نحلها؟ وهذه هي سؤالي، وأشكركم شكرا جزيلا. بارك الله فيكم على هذه الورشة.
بارك الله فيك. Sister Fatima, do you want to translate?
You need help? Come on, you speak Arabic.
No, go ahead, please.
So basically, the question is about, Jana Manasra from Palestine. They sponsor orphan sponsoring organization. They have more than 6,000 orphans. She talked about, I think, 3 main points. One, issues with money transfer. So there are many Palestinians in the diaspora who are willing and happy to support the organization, but the issue with money transfer. Two, being put in a blacklist, for whatever different reasons, which also again putting a lot of strain on this organization being able to raise funds. And then I think this point was mentioned in the first session or the second session, that sometimes fragmentations or issues inside the local community can affect their relationship back with the diaspora or with the international organizations. So how can they overcome these 3 main challenges?
Okay, thank you. I think we'll take questions, maybe a group of 2-3 questions, and then we'll go back to the speakers. I think as Asil Tamim had the second question or comment, and I will ask if he can please be very short because of time.
السلام عليكم. شكرا لكم جميعا وشكرا لكل المتحدثين. أنا أصيل تميم مهدي، رئيس منظمة تعزيز للتنمية من اليمن. حبيت بس أشارك معكم بفكرة أنه في اليمن لا يوجد نظام خاص في موضوع المغتربين والتحويلات المالية وما إلى ذلك. كل التحويلات المالية التي تأتي من المغتربين هي تأتي بصفة فردية وشخصية لأهاليهم ولأسرهم. منذ بداية الصراع في مارس 2015 اليمن كان هناك دور كبير للتحويلات النقدية والمالية من المغتربين، ولكن السؤال هو كيف يمكن عمل شبكة لحشد الموارد الخارجية من المغتربين وعمل كونكت ما بينها وما بين المنظمات المحلية. هذا السؤال الأول. السؤال الثاني وبحاول أختصر فيه، وهي معضلة تعاني منها كثير من المنظمات المحلية في اليمن، هو أن المانح الدولي أو المانحين أو المنظمات الأمم المتحدة مركزة فقط على بعض المنظمات المحلية وتعمل معها منذ بداية الحرب، بينما الهدف الرئيسي للمنظمات هو تمكين المجتمع المحلي. فصعوبة وصول المنظمات المحلية الناشئة للمانحين هذا يعتبر عائق. كيف يمكن أن نحن كمنظمات مجتمع مدني ناشئة نقدر أن نعمل كونكت مع المنظمات المحلية الدولية، أو كيف يمكن مثلا أن تكون هناك شبكة للتواصل ما بين المنظمات المحلية على المستوى المحلي والخارجي. وشكرا لكم، وأنا ممتن جدا لاستماعي لكل هذه الكلمات وكل هذه المعارف الجديدة وكل هذه الأفكار، وأرحب بالجميع من كل مكان. شكرا.
Thank you very much. And what I wanted to say is there is also some comments made on the chat. One is first of all by Sister Shaheen from Islamic Relief Worldwide. It will be good to add this into the UK government international aid white paper. I would say definitely. So if anyone is doing the white paper, I don't know if the WHAF or IFW suggest to include this. And the FCDO, I remember many years ago, also used to provide funding to diaspora organizations, but obviously it's among the things that they stopped doing with the cuts, but even before the cuts that had stopped in that sense. And the issue of transfer of money obviously comes a lot, and I can, that's great, Shaheen. And if you need any support on that, let us know and we can contribute as well, all of us. But if anyone is planning to do this white paper contribution, just let us know as well so that there can be some form of coordination. So there's a few questions here. One is on the fragmentation, and maybe I'm going to fragmentations between your diaspora on issues related to matters that are happening in the country, and whether you can answer a question on how these issues can be best addressed. Clara, it's for you. Sorry if I didn't mention it.
Yeah, that's that's difficult to answer. Yeah, what I don't know if I can provide an answer on what can be done in the context, but what I just shared in the chat is money transfer is very an important topic, and since the beginning of the conflict, Sudanese diaspora, as we've been doing a lot of work at Shabaka in Sudan, has been advocating a lot, and that is the main issue. That they were like, if we managed to fundraise, we managed to collect money, and we have the local organizations that are really ready to answer, but we can't get any money to enter the country. So what we've done so far, there's a coordination unit that has been created, and they've been trying to identify what are the challenges related to money transfer, and also what are some, I would say, not solutions or like tips, because for now it's difficult to overcome like international sanctions. It's something that you can't answer here, but what could be done to maybe have some cash to enter the country. So, for example, it's training people in conflict-free zones to provide remote banking services whenever there's a network available. Maybe you can, and also there's a will to do more research into mobile money solutions, maybe distribution of vouchers. I don't know if it really answered the question, but I can just say that it's a critical issue that needs more research. This is what I can say. And in terms of how to connect maybe local organizations with INGOs, that's the importance of coalitions, and that you don't work alone and you come together, because then you have a more powerful voice. Be it a coalition of only local organizations, but we've seen, and there already exists, sometimes you have coalitions with multiple actors, diaspora and local organizations, just trying to address INGOs. This is what I can say so far.
Thank you, Clara. And Sophia, in 1 minute, if you want to respond to any of these comments and questions that were raised earlier around money transfer, around fragmentation within the diaspora and locals, also around this building trust when you're a new organization, local organizations, how can you build the links with international organizations?
So maybe just to speak briefly to the fragmentation. I think it's something that is repeated again and again, but I do think that dialogue and meeting and discussing it is key, and sometimes it's uncomfortable, these discussions, but to let them be. And I think the more that we have them, the easier it becomes, and the more people can understand each other. So that would be when it comes to fragmentation. Then for local organizations and making the connections to diaspora and international actors, I think first of all, this is a change that also needs to come from international actors, and there are other forums from that. They need to become more accessible. They need to listen more to local actors and be willing to engage with local actors in different formats. As a local actor yourself, I think, come to these spaces where you can engage with diaspora and international actors. I think diaspora can be a good way of doing that. So through partnering with diaspora, at least what we've seen from DEMOC's side is that sometimes diaspora and local organizations together are able to leverage kind of each other's strengths and in that way partner with international organizations. But I would say primarily this is a structural change, and to keep doing the good work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. And the issue of money transfer is a recurring issue. Dr. Hani knows that we've been working on that for the past 20 years. Since, interestingly, yesterday was the anniversary of, September 11, and that's unfortunately when all these issues started, and it's not related to a conflict that happens now or will happen tomorrow. And the conversations around these issues are happening at the UK level. There are working groups with Bond and in the US, but unfortunately they do not involve diaspora actors and local actors. And perhaps there are some things that need to be changed at that level. And I think, yes, someone mentioned collective voice, and it's important to build coalition, Sister Shaheen. And perhaps, there's more that needs to be done on that issue, and not just, to address that issue just when there is a humanitarian crisis, but because it's a lifeline for populations, as we've discussed before. I'm sorry, we've run over time, so this is where we close this session. But I'll leave the floor to our speakers to close the whole, I think, interesting afternoon, wherever you are, or morning or evening around Diaspora Solidarity.
Thank you, Abdurrahman, Sophia, and Clara. It was absolutely interesting and exciting and informative session. Really, there's a lot to learn from each other. Thank you, everyone, for your contribution. It has been passionate, visionary discussions by providing your perspective and sharing knowledge with us. We're about to close. To wrap up everything, we again welcome Dr. Hani and call him to read the closing remarks. Dr. Hani.
What is the closing remarks?
You didn't receive them.
I'm just sending you a message. Otherwise,
I know, and I send a message to someone.
I have 50 points to read.
50. Okay. You read few, and then we can read the main outputs from each session. Go ahead, Dr. Hani. You start reading. You have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
I think I thank every and each one of you, especially the people who are in the room over the last 4 hours. It was very exciting for me to listen to the high-level discussion by all of you. Thank you very much for the contribution. I think the big question, which about the bank transfer, as Abdurrahman mentioned at the end, is a part of colonization. Actually, colonization is not only by donor culture, it's by restricting the movement of money by the banking system to make it difficult for the local organization to receive money. This is number one. Number two is to force the donors in the West or somewhere else not to give the money to the local organization, but to give it to international organization or United Nations, who started now for the last 5 years, not even to receive this money, but to collect zakat money and waqf money. The role of diaspora actually does not go only to 4 or 5 or 6 points. If I mentioned 50 points in my understanding from discussion, does not stop at funding, advocacy, access, knowledge sharing, valuable culture, values, intellectual capability, political, social, pioneering, supplying human resources, economical role, the arts, the drama, the education, the language, a lot of things in the diaspora. We need to treat the diaspora as local citizens. I remember I mentioned by the late Prime Minister of Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, who said that every child is gifted. My statement, every diaspora individual is gifted. Discover the gift, discover the talent, discover the ability, discover the intellectual ability of any individual who came to your country. We are not here coming as second-class citizens, we are here equal, whether actually the first generation, the second generation, or the third generation. Actually, if we want to end this kind of colonialism, we have to go to the kitchen of decision-making. That's why Islamic Leaf started going to this kitchen, which is called United Nations, in 1993, to be a part of at least listening to the decision makers and try to impact. I invite every diaspora organization, every local organization, every international organization to join inside the kitchen of the decision maker, whether it's EU, whether it's actually League of Arab States, whether actually what's the other one? United Nations and the others. Actually, we have, if we cannot change the system, we have to be a part of modifying the system. If we cannot remove colonialism, we have to change it and modify its poisoning attitude affecting
في مواقفه وتؤثر على المجتمعات المحلية وعلينا، ولكن يجب أن ننظر إلى المغتربين على أنهم مواطنون محليون على أنهم ذي مصداقية من دول البلد حتى لو كانوا في المغترب، لأن لديهم أشياء قد لا تكون موجودة لدى الأسكان الأصليين. أشكرك فاطمة، أرى أن يدك بدأت ترتفع وعلي أن أتوقف وإلا سنستمر حتى الغد. شكرا لك، شكرا لك دكتور. أردت فقط قبل الإغلاق أن أقول أن هناك ما التالي. هذا السؤال كجزء من هذه السلسلة من المشاورات. تفضلي، سأنهي في النهاية بعدما قد تقولي هذا. سيكون هناك 3 مجموعات تركيز في الأسابيع الثلاثة القادمة. ذكرنا هذا، وأنه يجب النظر إلى السياق، سواء كنا نتحدث عن الصومال أو باكستان أو التضامن للمغتربين في المغتربات من مختلف، مثلا من في سوريا. سيكون هناك 3 مجموعات تركيز مختلفة، غرضها هو أن ييسر نقاشات تتعلق بكل بلد، تتعلق بالمغتربين واللاعبين وهذا سينتهي في نوفمبر، وسيكون هناك جلسة أخيرة نتحدث فيها عن الأفكار والمقترحات والمستنتجات. وفي تلك الأثناء سنرسل لكم استبيان نطلب من جميع الموجودين أن يملؤوه، ونحن نرحب بآرائكم في هذه الجلسة وما هي آرائكم تتعلق بالتقدم إلى الأمام. هذا كل ما أردت قوله. دكتور هاني تابع. فقط أردت أن أذكر الجميع بمغرب وليبيا. من فضلكم المعلومات التي تأتي من تلك البلدان غير معقولة على الإطلاق، غير معقولة. وهذه الأرقام للأشخاص الذين تأثروا بدأت تتزايد، ستزيد 100% غدا. لسوء الحظ بين البلدين تخطينا 8 أو 9 آلاف موت قتيل، وغيرهم هم جرحى أو مشردون. من فضلكم شجعوا المجتمعات المحلية لتجمع الأكبر عدد من الأموال لليبيا والمغرب. شكرا جزيلا. شكرا دكتور هاني. ننهي هذه الجلسة الافتتاحية ونشكرك، نشكر المتحدثين المشاركين وفريق واف وفريق منار أكاديمي. سننهي الآن ونتطلع قدما لنراكم في المناسبة التالية الإنسانية. شكرا والسلام عليكم.
Thank you.